This happened back in 2004 in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time and out deer hunting with my dad and a friend of his, Frank. I do remember this day like it was yesterday. The dialogue isn't word for word, obviously, but the ideas of it are 100% accurate, of that I'm sure. As a side note too, it was only one day after that 8 people were shot less than 2 hours away. So my dad and I had a few different stands over an area of maybe 3/4 of a square mile, I would say. He had been hunting there for at least 10 years, and I'd been going with him since I was about 5. Up until I was 12, legal age to hunt with a rifle, I'd just been tagging along mostly. This particular morning we walked up to my stand first. It was about 5 a.m. or so still pretty dark outside. I got situated and my dad and Frank went off to our other 2 stands over a ridge, maybe another 500 or 600 yards off. Sitting there in the dark is always a little bit eerie, I'll admit. But not long after my dad and Frank left, I see a flashlight from the general direction of where they headed, maybe 200 yards away, roughly moving in my direction. I figured that they forgot something from the truck or something, so I radioed to see what they were doing. We're sitting in my stand. Frank's about to head off to the other one, he says. Obviously then, this flashlight is somebody else. This isn't super uncommon, and it really isn't a big deal. I mean, those woods get pretty crowded sometimes, and there's a spot to park in that general direction anyway. So I turn on my light so the other hunter can see that there's somebody there, and he stops. I see the light turn and just go a different direction. No big deal, and I end up dozing off while it's still dark out. When I wake up though, the sun is up. It's around 8 a.m. and I sit there for a bit. I radio my dad to see if he's heard or seen anything moving. Nothing yet. A couple of gunshots off in the distance is all. I get up and go for a slow little walk to get my blood moving for a bit. Not far, maybe 30 yards out and back, trying not to make a sound. I come back to my stand and sit down and take a real good look around. Nothing really going on. When I finally look out to my left, where I had seen the flashlight before, and I see orange. For anyone unfamiliar, hunters have to wear blaze orange during gun season. I radioed my dad and Frank to see if either one of them were moving around, and Dad says no. I hear nothing from Frank, so I grab the binoculars out of my backpack to see if it's Frank. And it's definitely not Frank. And this guy is looking directly at me through his scope, rifle aimed directly at me. This is a huge no-no as well. The massive rule that we all learn in hunter's education is never point your rifle at something that you don't intend to shoot. Dumb people still do it though. It's few and far between, but it does happen. And this is why normal people use binoculars. My first thought was, what an idiot. The thing is though, is that even with me looking at him, he doesn't put his gun down. Now I'm starting to panic a little bit, thinking that I'm going to be the next hunting murder victim. So I slowly grab my rifle, get up, stand behind as many trees as I can, and walk down a little path to the side of my stand. My stand is on this kind of little knoll on the side of a much larger hill. I radio my dad, tell him what's up. He tells me to sit tight and stay out of sight. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, I couldn't do that, and I had to keep looking. And every time I looked, the guy was still aiming in my direction, but was always standing in a different spot. Like, I would look, go back to hiding, look again, and he would be like 30 yards from where he was last time. About 10 minutes of this goes by when my dad radios me, and he says, "How you doing, bud?" Looking back, he was very obviously trying to keep me calm. At the time, I thought that he just wasn't taking me seriously. So I said, he's still there, but he keeps moving. I don't know what his problem is." Dad told me to just keep hidden and he'll figure it out, that he'll be coming up near him in a minute or two. And that was when I heard the shot. I lost it instantly as well, trying to get a hold of my dad. Did he just get shot? Where is he? Did he have to shoot the guy? What the heck is going on? I sat there too for maybe like 2 or 3 minutes that felt like hours. And then, "Alright son, come on out and head toward my stand." I peek out over the little knoll that I was hiding behind and see my dad waving from along the ridge that the random guy had been on. I make the trek on over to him to see what happened. Turns out that Frank was feeling a little restless and took a little stroll, and ended up on the other side of that particular ridge the stranger was on, not knowing that he was there. He had actually knocked his radio battery loose while he was getting situated earlier in the morning, and had no idea that anything was even going on. The shot that I heard was actually Frank shooting a deer, but Dad said that as soon as Frank shot, the guy walked off away from us toward the logging road. We helped Frank out with his deer, but we decided to call it an early day after that. Although I was extremely nervous for the rest of the week, it did go on with no other incidences, which, for me, was good. So I'm a 24-year-old lad living in the UK. I work as a pharmacist at a hospital, and I usually do night shifts. My workplace is just a few lots away from home, so I just walk every night. But a few months ago, while I was on my way to work at around midnight, a car stopped in front of me and rolled down its window. The guy inside was wearing a scrub suit, so I'm assuming that he was a nurse, had dark hair, chubby, and is probably around my age. "Hey, where you heading? Let me drive you to work." I politely declined. The guy looked harmless, and I guess being polite wouldn't hurt. He looked pretty normal, but there was just something in his eyes that unsettled me. He didn't go away after that as well, and kept on insisting to drive me to work. But that's when I snapped and I told him that I was waiting for my boyfriend, which isn't true because my boyfriend is in the US, miles away from me. He seemed to believe it though, and then just drove away. Days go by though, when I get a chat request. I try to check the profile and saw that it was that same creepy lad offering a ride to me to work. How he got my name, I have no idea. But I didn't pay his chat any attention, and I just went on with my pretty busy life. 2 days after that, I got another message from him saying, "You were smiling earlier, you look cute." After reading that message, it felt like I'd been splashed with an ice-cold bucket of water. Was he at the hospital? I didn't want to know, so I told him to stay away and F off. Days passed again, and I've almost forgotten about this guy when I saw him standing in the hallway looking at me while I was exiting the room doing rounds. He tried to approach, but I just sort of beelined my way to the other hallway and went back to the pharmacy. But that was when I started freaking out and I told my boyfriend. He advised me to just drive to work instead of walking, and I did right after that night. I also blocked him to avoid any unwanted future creepy messages, and so far I haven't seen him in months. And honestly, I would like to keep it that way. This happened about 5 years ago. I was working at a translation company based here where I live. It was a 7-story building, and that day I went for lunch break and grabbed my phone. It was an old phone with no smartphone tech, just calls and texts. And I finished my lunch and took the elevator to the 7th floor. And inside of it, I got a phone call. I look at the screen and I see this weird phone number with like 20 or more digits. I decide to answer. There was a lot of static and white noise on the line, but it was a woman, and I understand everything that she said. But this is how the call went. "Hello? Hello? Who's this?" "Isaac? Isaac? Isaac?" That's my name. Yes? Who's calling?" "Isaac, the angel is going to die." "Who? Who's going to die?" "Isaac, the angel, she's going to die." The call ended here. There was a lot of static, and it just sort of dropped out. It really freaked me out a lot too, because, my niece's nickname was Angelita, which means little angel. She was born with Down syndrome and a really bad heart condition that made life for her really hard during the 2 years that she was with us. and that day she was actually scheduled for heart surgery at the main hospital here. But we'd actually made a GoFundMe campaign for her, and lots of people helped, specifically from the US. That night she went to surgery, and it was all okay. Doctors were taking care of her, and everything was looking good. But the next day is when she had complications and was moved to the ICU. The whole family was at home too when we got the terrible news that her heart had stopped and she unfortunately passed away. Our whole world really crumbled, and I was stuck with depression for about a year after it. To this day, I really have no idea who called me that day. My mum had always told me that I was gifted. I could always feel energies. I had dreams of things as well that would come to pass, and I wouldn't say that I'm a medium or anything. I mean, I've never communicated with anything on the other side. More so that I just sort of attracted them. We hopped apartments too a lot when I was younger, and no matter where we went, something would immediately find me. I'd have reoccurring nightmares, see figures, I'd be scratched, all sorts of stuff. I guess you could say that spirits like to pick on me, maybe. Another random fact that will come into play later as well is that I had bright blue eyes like my mum. So, we moved into this apartment and things immediately went very, very poorly. I had a dream that lasted only seconds. I was in a bright white room and there was this beast on the ceiling and it looked into my eyes and just roared. It was incredibly loud too, and I woke up and my mum and her boyfriend at the time had rushed into my aid because they heard me let out a scream that sounded like a deep full-grown man's scream and not a prepubescent boy's. My eyes turned hazel with brown splotches and have been that way ever since. I was obviously terrified, and we moved me into my big brother's room after that. But that night, I felt a presence and opened my eyes, and I saw a shadowy figure reach out and try and grab me. I immediately sprinted out of the room too, and I slept next to my mum on the couch in the living room from then on. But I always felt just watched from the hallway leading to my bedroom. Another thing that happened too was when I was laying in bed with my mum and her boyfriend, she looked up and saw this little girl in her petticoat standing in the hallway. He saw it too as well. I was actually asleep at the time, and I only knew this because they told me years later. Anyhow, everyone was being terrorized for months, and eventually we had just had enough. But we hired someone to come in, and she immediately detected a demonic presence. She had informed us that the building used to be a medical waste facility, and they'd dispose of and store blood in the basement, that sort of thing. My mum has told me since that she was actually able to confirm this detail, but to be truthful, I never asked how. Thinking about and speaking out this incident, though, brings me just terrible feelings, I must admit. Anyway, she blessed the place, and it didn't really do anything. We tried writing a scripture on the wall in this sort of highlighter stuff that could only be seen in UV light. We put up some crosses and that sort of thing, but it really just ticked it off even more. We eventually just moved out, and my mum spoke clearly as we left and said, "We're leaving, you're not allowed to follow us." And strangely enough, I've never had another experience with a spirit ever since then. A friend of mine that says that she's a medium, I'm not sure what I believe about this sort of thing, told me that maybe God or maybe a spirit, maybe myself even, walled myself off spiritually from my gift. I don't know about all of that, but when I think about all this, I must admit that it really upsets me. I'm 20 now, but this was easily the most turbulent time of my life. But I figured that it would intrigue some of you here, so feel free to ask me anything in the comment section below if you would like. Or maybe even add some insight or advice into my situation, as I'm definitely uninformed and ignorant about these sort of things, and I would appreciate the feedback. A couple of years ago, I was sitting in my bedroom around, I'd say 8ish PM, down near my university, and I was searching the internet and I got a FaceTime call from a number that I didn't recognize. But I answered it anyway because I figured that it was just a random person and I would grab my roommate and we would just start a convo with some random person somewhere in the world. Anyways, I answered the FaceTime call to a very, very dark room. At first, I only managed to see what looked like to be a blanket hung up over the window behind them. It was sunny where they were because you could see the sun peeking in from around the edges of the blanket and in a sort of transom window above the blanket. So I proceeded to say hello 2 or 3 times with nobody answering. Finally, though, someone appeared from the bottom of the screen and I kid you not, it was like literally me. I just kind of stared at them for a split second in shock and awe before sort of waving at them. As soon as I waved too, the other person on the other end mimicked my wave at the exact same time in the exact same motion. I freaked out at that point and I just shut off my computer immediately after that. I didn't receive another FaceTime call from that random number then or ever since. But my question is, could that possibly have been a FaceTime from myself from another dimension? I know that sounds weird, but I'm not lying to you when I say that it was me. Like, it was literally me. Also, it was nighttime where I was, and clearly daytime where he was. And the waving of the hand at the exact same time and speed and mannerism, I don't know. I don't know what it was, but it still creeps me out to this day, for sure. So this happened about 4 days ago now. My family lives on a farm, so we have a large amount of land, and we're off a sort of state road with a horseshoe-shaped driveway. We had a dump trailer as well that sits in our yard, just because we don't have anywhere else to put it. And due to this whole self-quarantine thing, I'm home with my younger brother. I hear honking outside, and at the window I can see just a white vehicle. But I'm sitting there, and the vehicle is just sort of honking as if they're waiting for someone to come out. This made me a bit uncomfortable. I mean, the fact that somebody just decided to sit there and honk, and didn't want to go and even look for fear of the possibility of being seen or anything. But of course, younger siblings, being as they are, was quite oblivious to how creepy this actually was and decided to walk up to the door in plain sight of the stranger's vehicle. Me, though, not feeling safe with just sitting there and letting my brother talk to some stranger who was sitting in the driveway, finally get up to talk to them. Obviously, I was very uncomfortable with it all, and not in the way that was like, I don't want to get sick, more of a way that there's a stranger who is honking at my door. In some sort of hindsight, though, I guess you could say that this whole thing may have been about the virus, in some regards anyway, but other factors do play in. So, there were 2 men in this white truck, and the one who spoke to me was in the passenger seat. The driver seemed quite nervous. Every time I refused to give him any information, he ended up starting the vehicle, and his friend had to keep insisting to keep talking, which led him in this sort of cycle of turning his truck on and off again. The first thing that I took note of, though, is that this guy had a very heavy accent, which I still can't quite pin. The best guesstimation I would have is maybe something European. He's asking about the dump trailer in my yard, if it's for sale, which I say no, it's not. He then asks if anybody else is home that he could talk to. I didn't hear exactly who he wanted since his friend had turned the engine on again, but my best guess is that either a husband or my father, as he kept looking about, telling him to have him call. And well, I'm not married and my father was at work, so I said no, and that if he really wanted to see someone, that he would have to come back at a later time. Then he insisted on giving his number. Still refusing to leave the vehicle while I was saying no. There was no point in getting his number as the trailer wasn't even for sale, and anyone else in my household would echo the exact same thing anyway. But he insists that I get some paper or something to write down his number. He has me come close to write down his number, where I notice the next thing. His number. His area code was Massachusetts number. And we're in Pennsylvania. Now, too, he has me get real close, like right up to the window, which completely throws the whole distance thing out. Apparently, they just didn't want to get out of the vehicle, which is what really made me uncomfortable as well. I was too afraid to go back into my house. I didn't truly want to irritate these people and turn my back by refusing, so I just followed what they asked me to do to get them the heck out of the driveway ASAP. And eventually the nervous guy just says, "Let's go." I told my parents all of this once they had gotten home. Gave them the number, which they didn't call, obviously, because it all seemed really suspicious. My dad then decided to pull out a gun for me to keep nearby, just in case somebody broke into the house because of this encounter. And as my father said when I told him why they had stopped in the first place, if that trailer was for sale, then there would be a for sale sign on it. So, why the heck were they there? When I was 13 years old, my family was actually robbed, unfortunately, by my mum's ex-best friend. Before robbing us, they had broken in multiple times. One time they left the front door open, in fact, and another, my mother opened the laundry room door, and as she did, the back door closed. But having these experiences, we eventually changed the locks and made sure that we locked the doors at night, and also armed the home alarm. But the following year, the events in this story happened. For context too, my family lived in a pretty bad area. People had been robbed, and some people had even been assaulted or even jumped, my brother included. But my father is a truck driver as well, so my mother, brother, and I were usually alone there. My mum is someone who really enjoys watching the ID channel on TV. In fact, my town was once featured on one of the ID channel shows. Our town has such a huge crime rate that a human trafficking ring was busted, and my mum's ex-best friend knew someone that was busted apparently. This city that I live in is one of the most dangerous in the country, and just yesterday we drove past a car dump. Earlier in the year also we've called the cops twice, and once because we'd heard someone in the backyard, and another because we heard gunshots. One night my brother was asleep in the living room. I was in my room, and my mother was in her bedroom. I was on my phone at like 1 a.m. because insomnia sucks. When suddenly I heard the doorbell being rang frantically. My mum is a pretty light sleeper, so she got up and went to the front door. She looked through the peephole at the door, and I walked out as she was standing on her tippy toes looking at the front door. She's like 5 foot tall, which roughly converted into centimeters is like 150 centimeters tall. She was speaking to the guy behind the door. I heard a muffled guy's voice say, "Hey, my car broke down and I need to use your phone." My mum cleverly replied, "I'm sorry, but we don't actually have a phone." She grabbed her phone after saying that. The man insisted and tried to open the door at one point. He got angry because it was locked and started shouting. I went to my brother and woke him up, and I told him to be quieter, and we ran to the bathroom. My mum eventually joined us, and we hid in the bathroom together, just sort of holding on to each other. It felt like a lifetime in that bathroom, but my mother was on the phone with 911 the entire time. I was making sure that my brother remained quiet. When my mum told the cops that we were there, she made sure that when she heard them knocking that it was them. She gave her statement, and I couldn't hear it all because my brother and I were in the bathroom together. But my mum told us that we could come out, and I immediately called my dad in tears. He answered, and I was crying so hard that my dad couldn't understand me, so I gave the phone to my mum. A while later, though, the cops came back and told my mother that they had actually caught the guy that my mum described, and he was playing on his phone and he didn't have a car, which means that his intentions were probably to break in and rob us, or maybe even worse. I think that my mum watching the ID channel may have just saved our lives that night. When I was about 15 years old, I got this phone call in the middle of the night that still sticks with me to this day. So it was around 3 in the morning on a school night when I woke up to a phone call. I was wondering who the heck would be calling me this late, but it was from an unknown number. I answered the phone, and there was a lot of wind on the other end, like the person was running. They were screaming my name over and over again. They were terrified, like they were being chased or something. My parents are divorced, and at the time my mum was working 3 jobs, including one at a casino, and my first thought was someone was attacking her while she was walking out to her car. I screamed, "Mum," 3 times, but the only thing that I heard was this person just screaming my name, and then the call just dropped. At this point, I'm in tears because I think my mum is getting brutally murdered, so I run upstairs to wake my dad up and tell him what's going on. He somehow manages to calm me down and tells me that he'll call my mum's sister. The next day at school, I go to everyone that I know asking if they prank called me last night. No one admitted it, and honestly, no one even seemed suspicious. I had a feeling, though, that something more sinister was going on since the person on the other end was literally screaming at the top of their lungs, and when I get home, my dad tells me that he got a hold of my aunt and that my mum was okay. And I just couldn't figure out what had happened. Another weird thing about this, though, was that the call felt like it only lasted a few minutes, but the call log said that it lasted a little over 10 minutes. Anyway, that night I'm getting ready for bed and my dad pokes his head in my room to tell me that my great-grandma passed away last night, right around the time that I got that phone call. I never did meet my great-grandma before, but apparently she was a very nice woman. Some family members would describe her as straight up nasty, but I don't know. I honestly think that I got a call from my great-grandma after she died, as she was being dragged away to the afterlife. So this happened about 4 or 5 years ago when I was still living at my parents' house. I had almost fallen asleep when I felt like I needed to go for a pee. As I was gathering strength to get up and go to the bathroom, I heard a voice just outside of my bedroom saying, "What are you doing?" The voice sounded a bit like my mum, so I answered, "I have to go to the bathroom." Immediately after that, I got a weird feeling that something was just a bit off. My parents' bedroom is down the hall, and I would have heard her walking over since my door was ajar. I got up and I opened the door all the way, but nobody was there. Where I was standing, I could see straight down the hall, and the door to my parents' bedroom was completely shut. I also checked the door to my sister's room, which was adjacent to mine, but it was shut as well. For a few minutes, I just sort of stood there completely frozen in place, before I finally went to the bathroom and back to my room. Needless to say, though, I had quite a hard time falling asleep after that. When I woke up the next morning as well, I asked my mum if she had been up last night, but she said no. I also asked my sister if she had heard anything, but she had slept through the night as well. This happened a few years back. In my spring break senior year of high school, I was hiking part of the long trail in AT, which goes south from Glastonbury to Bennington. It was the usual very cold nights, warm muddy days Vermont usually has in spring, so pretty fun to hike in. I was going to take a day to rest my feet, go swimming in a pond and cool off, so I took a detour onto the Bald Mountain Trail. I got to my campsite around 5, and the sun was setting, so I set up my hammock and rain tarp and made a fire. I made some Mountain House beef stroganoff and decided to just lay down and watch the fire for a bit. Now, I hadn't seen anyone since before noon, which is unusual because it's a pretty well-traveled section of the trail. And all of a sudden, I started to get really uneasy, and it definitely felt like someone was watching me from a distance. I ended up sitting with my back against a maple, facing the fire and holding my camp knife. A few hours later, maybe 9 or 10-ish, I heard a really loud crash in the woods, like a plane falling out of the sky sort of crash, or a freight train right next to me. And then just dead silence. No wind, no leaves, no owls, just dead quiet. I remember getting really, really uncomfortable and shouting out to see if anyone was there, but I just started hearing a really subtle sort of droning noise, like a key being rubbed on a bass string or a radio static, but super low pitched. I didn't sleep at all that night, and I just watched the moon go really slowly over the sky, and the sound eventually got quieter as it got lighter outside. When I could see well enough to walk, I picked up my gear and I just sprinted back to the main trail and found some people up early and hiked with them all the way back.